Do you remember the first time you were ever scared? Probably not, but if we then narrow our focus and ask, what was the first time a video game scared you? Well, then that's something we can work with. If you're anything like me, some of the most meaningful experiences being afraid probably happened in your most formative years. Childhood, for as whimsical and carefree as it can also be terrifying. The world, when viewed through the eyes of a child, is one that doesn't make very much sense. When your understanding of the world that you've been forcefully thrust into is so limited, when your imagination is active and you take everything at face value, well, those are the perfect conditions for what we in the business like to call a good spooking. Most people don't like being in the kinds of scenarios that evoke fear. Yet despite that, human beings seem to find themselves drawn to media that makes them scared. And children are no exception. In fact, children are a demographic that are probably one of the most obsessed with horror, ever. At first, that sounds concerning, but fear is an emotion that's as much a part of the human experience as joy or sadness. Media can be an effective way for children to develop and confront fear. It's healthy to let kids engage with horror, to tell ghost stories with their friends, and to equip them to overcome challenges. Horror, which is created for this very age demographic, is incredibly meaningful and can often be some of the most profound that there is. Sure, there is this preconception that children are just inherently easier to scare, but when you can't just rely on the same tactics that more adult horror employs, well, you gotta be more creative. In that way, I find the craft quite fascinating, and I think it's worthy of a discussion. Hi, I'm Lady Zillennial, or Lady Z for short, and today I'd like to talk about some childhood games that used to scare me, highlighting specific moments and figuring out what made them so effective. Why am I doing this exactly? Well, to keep it simple, I'm trapped in the spooky mansion, and a mysterious painting informed me that the only way to escape is to collect 999 spirits. They also said that spirits like YouTubers who talk about scary childhood memories, so that's exactly what I'm gonna do. It would appear that it's dark and I can't see a thing. Walter, are you trying to mess with me? Hello? I think I'm lost. Yeah, sure am. But this seems like as good a spot as any to shoot the video, so without further ado, let's talk about some spooky childhood games.
Casper! I need help! You want to help me?
To kick things off, let's talk about everybody's third favorite friendly ghost.
Casper!
Casper the Friendly Ghost has been a spooky icon in children's media for about as long as I can remember, with the character making his debut back in the 40s. These days, Casper is kind of fading into irrelevance, but in the 90s and 2000s, the little guy was everywhere, most notably in the hit 1995 live-action film simply titled Casper. And in 2006 with the straight-to-DVD film Casper Scare School, which spawned a series and even video game spin-offs. But these aren't the Casper games that matter to me. Rather, I want to focus on the game that young baby me considered to be her favorite, one of the earliest games I ever owned, that being Casper Spirit Dimensions for the PS2 and GameCube. Being a licensed game from the beginning of the 6th console generation, I'm curious to see what it was exactly that captivated my younger self, though its Metacritic score is not instilling a lot of hope in the game's quality, but if I can piss my pants, then it'll be worth it. Right off the bat, the tone of the game is distinctly grand and epic. A text crawl warns us that he attacked without warning. All ghosts have been imprisoned, and now only one remains. The fate of the world lies in his hands. Oh no, Casper buddy, why do you look like that? Well, it's everyone's favorite little guy, and he can do all the Casper things. Fly around, phase through solid objects, shoot blasts of energy out of his hands. Casper. So we enter the spooky mansion, and a young girl named Wendy tasks Casper with the goal of visiting various dimensions and liberating them from the oppressive control of a ghost named Kibosh. We arrive at the first dimension by entering a portal. This is Fantasy World, which is split up into roughly 4 sublevels, each with their own objectives. In the starting area, you have to track down every piece of this dude's armor, and on this hunt, you're eventually led to this dank cave where the music just completely changes. And this sudden, jarring shift, which, mind you, only happens in this very tiny area consisting of 2 rooms, put me on edge. Combined with the long-range enemies that can get the jump on you, yeah, this area kind of spooked me. Though it's pretty tame compared to other stuff that scared me in the same game. In a different sub-level, you'll find yourself in this maze with tight corridors and wizards that don't let up. On their own, the wizards aren't anything noteworthy, but the tight corridors and janky controls made me terrified to ever explore the maze. Not only was it easy to get lost, but yeah, I have no idea how my younger self ever found the exit. Because in order to progress, you're supposed to approach a wall that looks the slightest bit different and ram into it at full speed. You would think that using, I don't know, the f***ing energy blasts that come out of Casper's hands would get the job done, but no, that's not how this works. Stuff like this is common throughout the entire game, and the controls do not help. They're stinky. However, in a weird sort of roundabout way, these difficult controls kind of just enhance that childhood experience of being scared and overwhelmed. Similar to what the tank controls in Resident Evil accomplish. I sincerely doubt this was intentional, but it kind of ends up being a happy little accident. The second level is where things get marginally more terrifying. I never explicitly had a clown phobia, but what kid wouldn't find this creepy? And you have to go through its mouth to get to the level's boss, who looks like this. During this fight, he can shoot you with laser beams, and yeah, that was pretty nightmare-inducing. Man, they put this shit on the back of the box. They should have put this guy in the back instead.
Look, you need to be strong. You need to be tough. See, like this. Strong, tough. Are you ready?
What the hell, dude? What is your problem? I think a big part of this game's creep factor today comes from how its visuals have aged. Sure, part of that comes to the janky, lower poly look of its characters and environments, especially this early on in the 6th generation, but it also comes down to their designs, as well as the oppressive vibes and unwelcoming nature of the places that you explore. Fueling all this is a fully orchestrated soundtrack that makes this world feel threatening. And in no place is this better exemplified than in the game's 3rd level, a futuristic realm with a section that asks you to awaken this little robot's big brother. And the music track that plays here feels incredibly unwelcoming. When you make it over to the big robot, he just sits there.
Menacingly!
Poor guy is sad, and his music is so melancholy. It didn't help that this guy reminded me of The Iron Giant, a film which I simultaneously loved, but was also terrified by. Man, screw clown phobia. Terminator phobia is where it was at. Is that a fucking Terminator? In my Casper video game? Anyway, the level ends with robot wasps and a mech. Casper Spirit Dimensions, whoa. As a video game, it's got a lot of issues. It's incredibly short, does an awful job communicating the next objective, the controls are janky, and while I mostly enjoyed the soundtrack for what it is, there's a severe lack of polish shown in the fact that the tracks just kind of stop abruptly whenever they loop. It annoys me far more than it should. The game part of this game is pretty whack, but it is undeniably a spooky game that pushes its E rating pretty far. It'll always hold a special place in my heart, and for that, I'll give it 7 scare. Oh nice. I think the spirits like when I give out points. Hey, wait a minute. One of these spirits looks familiar. Hello?
Hey babe.
Noodly Boo, what are you doing here?
I don't know.
Cool. Wanna talk about scary childhood games with me?
Yeah, sure. Let me think. So there's this Scooby-Doo game that my brother had on the PS2 that kind of freaked me out, and it scarred me for life.
Oh, a Scooby-Doo game sounds perfect right now. Which one are we talking? Was it Scooby-Doo and the Spooky Swamp? Or maybe Scooby-Doo First Frights? How about Scooby-Doo Night of 100 Frights, or Scooby-Doo Unmasked? So after testing out an ungodly number of Scooby-Doo games, we realized that the specific one that Noodly Boo grew up with was Scooby-Doo Mystery Mayhem, released on PS2, Xbox, and GameCube. Scooby-Doo needs no introduction, being one of the most beloved IPs, like ever, spanning across an ungodly number of shows and movies, most of those being straight to DVD, it's not a surprise that there are also dozens and dozens of Scooby-Doo video games. And given the subject matter of the series, it was kind of inevitable that some kids would be scared. The first thing we see in Scooby-Doo Mystery Mayhem is a recreation of the classic 1969 Scooby-Doo intro, recreated in the game's engine. The game does a pretty good job of replicating the feel of the classic animated series, which is key because the original series was kind of spooky. In particular, I'd like to out my younger self for being afraid of Charlie the Robot. Man, the Terminator phobia was real. Level 1 sees the gang visiting a haunted library where there are ghosts. And these very ghosts are what scared Noodly Boo as a kid.
So you have to understand that I played this game when I was maybe like 5 years old, max. And for a kid's game, it doesn't really do a good job of guiding you through that. I could barely read, let alone play video games, so the struggle was real. And the other thing to think about is that this game never really makes you feel safe, because the ghosts can just go through walls, and that was really the scariest part for me. There was no, like, safe space where I could just figure out what the hell is going on with the game, and all of a sudden a ghost would jump out of me and try to kill me. So...
After all was said and done, we didn't really get very far into the game. By the time you finally get an ability to fight back against the ghosts, you've trudged through a dozen almost identical looking rooms. And the two of us got bored before we even made it to the second level. So that was Scooby-Doo Mystery Mayhem, and we give it 6 points.
Woo!
Thank you. Noodly Boo also thought that the video game adaptation of the 2006 animated film Monster House was pretty scary. But the game has already been covered in more depth on the channel already, so I'll let Noodly Boo tell you how she feels about it real quick.
Yeah, so the Monster House game is a lot like the Scooby-Doo game, except you're all alone and everything wants to kill you. You'll just be minding your own business, and then a chair will come to life and attack you. Why? There's also the fact that the Monster House eats you at the beginning, which is why you're there in the first place, and that's just weird to think about. Everything about this place is threatening and dangerous, and I don't like it.
What'd you think about the movie?
No comment.
I'll say for my part that the QuickTime events were easily the scariest part of this whole game to me. It didn't help that I sucked hard at these as a kid, and they have the potential to make you lose an insane amount of progress. Like I said before, SD already covered every Monster House game as well as the movie, so click the card or link in the description if you feel so inclined. I'm giving it like 6 scare points. Thanks, Noodly Boo. I appreciate the help.
Sure thing. Good luck finding the spirits.
Since we just talked about a haunted residence, it only makes sense to cover the most iconic haunted residence that there is, Disney's Haunted Mansion. Most people know it as one of the best rides that the Disney theme parks have to offer, a perfect blend of humor, simple yet effective sleight of hand, and a touch of spooky. But you see, I knew it from the 2003 film starring Eddie Murphy. The ride holds up really well, and was just the right amount of scary for my childhood self. The film was jam-packed with references to the ride, so the intended effect is that you would watch the film and be like, oh, I recognize that. Except I had that experience in reverse. The film wasn't exactly good, but younger me absolutely adored it. So much so that I did the thing that I imagine a lot of kids with a DVD collection and an endless amount of free time did, which was poke around in the bonus features. This was a very VFX heavy film, so seeing the behind the scenes for how the final product was constructed captivated me, and is likely the inception of my growing interest in film. I will give the film credit for being a PG movie that contains imagery which, even today, I think is pretty intense. This mausoleum scene in particular. This shit terrified me. But when I wasn't looking at how these creatures were created in the DVD bonus features, I was stumbling upon a spooky surprise. The bonus features contained a bunch of different trailers, and one of said trailers was for a video game based on the Haunted Mansion. The trailer shows very little of the actual game itself, but it did have 2 things that caught me off guard. The first being a T rating, which implied that this game wasn't f***ing around. And lastly, the proof that this game was indeed not f***ing around. This image became seared into my memory. Decades passed and I never got the chance to play the Haunted Mansion video game, But all these years later, that lingering curiosity remained. So I think this is the perfect opportunity to finally give this game a proper shake. This is Zeke, the protagonist of the game. He's here because of a job posting to be a caretaker of this mansion's estate. But, it turns out he was duped into doing these ghosts a solid. He doesn't seem to be all that upset about it though. Equipped with a magic lantern, Zeke has to explore the mansion, turning the lights on in every room so that he can find the special gems and collect all 999 spirits that have been corrupted. Hey, why does that sound familiar? The gameplay boils down to enter room, fight off enemies, find the light switch, inspect everything, and I mean everything. Ghost appears, and you suck them up like Luigi's Mansion. The gameplay loop is fairly standard, but the Haunted Mansion game does excel in its atmosphere and effective moments of horror. You walk through these narrow corridors into isolated rooms with dark, moody lighting. There's hardly a soundtrack most of the time. Most of the time, all you'll hear is the gentle downpour of rain outside, or the ticking of a grandfather clock in the foyer. But usually, it's just your footsteps. The silence is soon interrupted by one of the many enemy encounters. The standard enemy is creepy looking enough, but not very far into this experience, you find yourself face to face with what I consider to be the scariest foe in the game. You spot a woman in the distance. After pursuing her, you find yourself in a kitchen and have this experience. They put this in a game with the Disney logo, what? This was the part of the video game trailer that scared the shit out of me. In the actual game, yeah, it kind of lives up to what I feared it would be. I don't think I need to explain why this is scary. Just look at this. The various rooms of the mansion all have some new twist. Like this room with books that create a path for you, or this one with walls that follow you around and disorient you. Seriously, this room made me incredibly uncomfortable. Sadly, I do have my fair share of issues and critiques with the Haunted Mansion's gameplay, notably when it comes to combat, as attacking requires you to spam the R trigger. And as somebody who played this on GameCube, the R trigger is not a very ideal button for this. The lock-on feature doesn't work as well as I want it to, and enemies feel a bit too aggressive for Zeke's limited moveset. The process of searching for spirits could also get very tedious very quickly, as it basically amounts to pressing the B button next to every single object in a room until the ghosts appear. Critiques aside, I largely enjoyed my time with the game. Gameplay was kind of just okay in my opinion, but the atmosphere and spooky surprises were enough to make me glad that I played this and fulfilled a desire that my younger self once had. So I think I'm gonna have to award this game 9 scare points. You know, playing the Haunted Mansion game just reminded me that there was another game from my childhood that I was keenly aware of, but sadly never got the chance to play. That being Grabbed by the Ghoulies for the original Xbox. Rareware is a company that needs no introduction. They were the ones responsible for some of the most beloved Nintendo games in the 90s, Donkey Kong Country, Banjo-Kazooie, and GoldenEye 007, just to name a few. Famously, the company was purchased by Microsoft in 2002, putting an end to their long-standing relationship with Nintendo, and nowadays, the studio is a shell of what it used to be. But when the acquisition was fresh, there were a few attempts at utilizing Rare's talents to create a few video games. One of these projects was Grabbed by the Ghoulies, a curious little game that I witnessed a childhood friend play, and sadly never got the opportunity to do so myself. But I thought it looked kinda creepy, and I wanted to see what all the fuss was about. I never got that chance because he always hogged his Xbox, and I never had one of my own. But now all these years later, boom, it's the game. Oh, this is so exciting. It's time to finally see what I've been missing out on after all these years. So I know reception of this game is kind of mixed, but it does have a cult following. Yeah, it really didn't do much for me, though I can still respect the game for its quirkiness and a lot of the things that make it special and unique. This is Cooper. He and his girlfriend Amber are headed to a village, but it starts raining, so they seek shelter at a spooky mansion. Amber gets kidnapped and Oh no, she gets turned into an Uggo. Uh-oh, stinky. The bulk of the early game is about finding ingredients for this special soup that'll transform her back into her original form. This game is essentially a beat 'em up with a handful of variations in the gameplay, like beating the shit out of your girlfriend for not living up to unrealistic beauty standards. What the hell, Cooper? I'm not a big fan of beat 'em ups personally, and Grabbed by the Ghoulies didn't do much to win me over. In order to deal damage to enemies, you have to flick the right analog stick in their direction, and this is probably my biggest problem. These controls are serviceable, but I don't particularly like the game feel, especially with the tiny hitboxes and delay with attacks. It just feels like I'm trudging through molasses. Grabbed by the Ghoulies does provide a unique objective in each room, which keeps things somewhat fresh. But even then, I don't feel like there's enough variation in moment-to-moment gameplay. On a more positive note, the game's art direction and general presentation has a lot of personality. There are a lot of rare isms, like the nonsense speech and style of comedy. Everything is loud, cartoonish, and bombastic. Kind of the complete opposite of the Haunted Mansion game in almost every way, which works for this game. It's really not trying to be scary, it's kind of just trying to be goofy. But the thing is, we're looking at games for their spooky qualities, and it's really hard to be scared when skeletons keep ripping ass. Though to the game's credit, I admit that there are a couple of things that produce what scientists like to call the heebie-jeebies. You know, a couple of heart-pounding moments. There are these QuickTime event hallway segments where you're jump-scared by head mounts. Hey look, it's Banjo-Kazooie. Rest in peace, you poor bastards. These are scary in the lame way that, yeah, if you blast my ears with loud noises, obviously I'm gonna be startled. A lot of rooms in this game have conditions that, if failed, summon the Grim Reaper, and can often be panic-inducing. He'll slowly approach you, and if he successfully gives you a wet willy, well, you're dead. I'll be honest, I didn't finish this one, but based on what I played, I'd say that this game has earned about 4 scare points. Allow me to set a scene. You're a kid, in school, and today is one of those special days where your teacher hands out the Scholastic book catalog. It's full of a bunch of stuff that looks pretty neat, but then you see it. Holy shit, they have video games. So you take that catalog home, you ask for money, you place the order, and a few weeks later, on that fateful day, you finally get the game that you've been waiting for. And it's Math Blaster for the Nintendo DS. One fateful day, I got that opportunity a second time, and I saw that this catalog had a video game that I might actually want to play. That being Goosebumps Horrorland for the DS. Goosebumps needs no introduction, as it's the go-to horror series for kids. I definitely have nostalgia for the books, as well as the TV series and all of its campy glory. Goosebumps Horrorland, the game, is loosely based on the Horrorland series, and was released on the Nintendo DS, as well as the Nintendo Wii and PlayStation 2. All versions are largely identical, but for the sake of being thorough, and because I never got the chance to play the Wii version growing up, I decided to check that one out too. The game opens up with this guy, a horror, dropping off a ticket to Horrorland. The player character is immediately angsty and doesn't want anything to do with this shit, but the moment the ticket pieces itself back together, your player character needs to go. You have the most carefree parent on the planet who's just fine driving you and your friend Nate to Horrorland without question, and here it is. You're unleashed upon the park, only to discover that you can never leave. So before you get your hopes up on what you're about to experience, this is a minigame collection, and it's strung together by park exploration, which progresses a main story. It's the glue tying all of these minigames together, and this is where I find myself being incredibly annoyed. I appreciate the effort put in here instead of just, having minigames up on a list or a menu that you have to select. I just find the act of walking from one area of the map to another to be incredibly tedious. This game definitely needs a run button, and the Wii version does have a way to change your speed, by which I mean pressing the Z button actually makes you move slower. Oh no. The park is split up into 5 sections, and the later ones can get really complex and confusing to navigate. You'll spend several minutes tediously walking from one area to another just to get to the next minigame. The minigames themselves vary in quality, as one might expect. The Wii game has more cutscenes and graphics, which, still don't look amazing and are actually downgraded from the PS2 version's graphics, But the more important thing is that the home console versions let you choose between playing as a boy or a girl. It's something that's just flat out not an option on the DS. Yeah, only boys are allowed to play in this low poly version of Horrorland. Insane graphical downgrade aside, the DS version doesn't feel too compromised, all things considered. Just about every minigame and even the layout of the map is nearly identical. I find certain minigames to be far more annoying on Wii, though quite a few minigames are janky regardless of which version you play. Minigame collections were a dime a dozen back in the day, and you wouldn't expect one to be even remotely scary, especially one based on Goosebumps, but despite how goofy and campy it can often be, there were some standouts, like this minigame where vampires are slowly approaching you and you have to use your flashlight to kill them. The sounds they make as they die are pretty horrific, and the game itself is genuinely challenging. Seeing them slowly crawl towards me as I frantically tried to recharge my battery just made me uncomfortable. The Wii version is actually made a whole lot less scary by the vampires actually talking to you.
Ah, my eyes!
The vampires are silent on DS, which I think makes them spookier. Plus, there's something to be said about the lower resolution and poly count on the DS, which leaves a lot more to the imagination. The soundtrack across both versions is pretty atmospheric, at least most of the time. Why do I suddenly feel like committing piracy? The main storyline sees you teaming up with a little girl who looks suspiciously like Boo from Monsters Inc. in order to sneak around and gather all 5 ticket pieces and escape.
Look out! The monster police!
Oh, silly child. All police are monsters. In order to find the last piece, you have to sneak into the secret employees only area by purchasing a mask which physically transforms you into a horror. And can I just say, you are fabulous. Gigi, the little girl who's been helping you out this whole time, has been kidnapped. So you make your way to the final zone, and after a chill game of mini golf, you're promptly arrested and forced on a ride called Certain Death, which lives up to its name, as these mummies will pop up and attack you. There are spikes everywhere, and I'm pretty sure that's just straight up blood. You escape, rescuing Gigi, who actually turns out to be a monster this whole time. Something that was kind of foreshadowed earlier in the game. After this shocking revelation, the game just ends. That's it. You know, it's pretty goofy, but it's also in line with how a lot of Goosebumps books end, so I can respect it. Ultimately, I think the game has earned a somewhat respectable 6 scare points. It's still shovelware adjacent, but like higher tier, slightly above average shovelware, if that makes sense. Oh, hi spirits. Oh, interesting. Alright, we're in the home stretch now, but I'm kind of running low on games to talk about. Almost every spirit in the mansion has congregated around me, and some of these spirits are patron spirits, who would like to share some of their own childhood experiences. First up, Spirit Eden mentions Lit, a horror puzzle game published by WayForward, the studio best known for the Shantae games. This game sees you turning lights on and off to create a path of light that you can use to navigate the darkness in a haunted school. The soundtrack is eerie, the atmosphere and use of lighting is top-notch, and the death animations are shockingly horrific. If you want to hear me talk about this game in a bit more depth, a different version of me already covered it in this video talking about WiiWare games, which will be linked in the description and in the card. Third Watcher mentions Minecraft, in particular cave exploration. It's easy to get lost and disoriented when you're on the hunt for resources. If you're playing alone, then that feeling of isolation is likely to set in. At times you might hear the occasional sounds of enemy mobs, and when you can't quite figure out where they are, well, that's spooky. The only light that exists is the light that you produce, and if you make a mistake, the consequences could mean dropping all of your equipment and resources, meaning that the stakes are often pretty high. Starman Omega mentions the ending of Earthbound, which, yeah, the Gygas boss fight is pretty infamous, even to me, somebody who still has yet to play Earthbound, and yes, it is in the backlog. I will get to it eventually. He also mentions that Super Mario Sunshine was his first game, and the underside of Pianta Village scared him for reasons that he's not too sure of to this day. Lastly, Psyche Clips mentioned a couple of examples, but I was particularly interested in this level from Super Princess Peach, where a giant thwomp enemy that takes up the entire screen is able to one-shot you. You have to be sneaky and perform a very specific pose in order to not get caught. I haven't played this game myself, but I kinda like this because it reminds me of the gamer minigame in Game & Wario. And now I've said the word game so many times that it doesn't sound like a word anymore. Anyways, thank you, Patron Spirits. I appreciate you sharing. Flash games were a big part of my childhood, especially as someone who didn't have access to a portable console until about the age of 9. If we're talking about spooky games, then yeah, there's plenty to choose from. I definitely spent a good amount of time playing Flash games based on Courage the Cowardly Dog, Billy and Mandy, The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody, but to get to the game that truly terrified me, we'll have to hop over to Wonka.com. In the 2000s, this website used to host a little game called Laffy Taffy Long Lasting 3D Pyramid Challenge. And yes, it was important for me to say the full title. Laffy Taffy Long Lasting 3D Pyramid Challenge is a game where you explore a pyramid in 3D with challenges. Your objective is to navigate the maze, collecting keys and map pieces, all while avoiding the game's enemies, Wang Doodles. This was my Five Nights at Freddy's. Running into one of them drains your flashlight battery, and you kinda need that to see. You navigate the maze in search of these Laffy Taffy walls. Upon arriving at one, you'll either get more light for your flashlight, or a useful item, like a key, piece of map, or a hint. But as a bonus, each one provides you with a pun. What do you get when you combine a monkey with a pie? A orangutan. How do trees get on the internet? They log on. What has a tail, a head, and no body? A coin. Okay, some of these feel less like puns and more like riddles, but it's still pretty satisfying. The controls are about as janky as you might expect for a 3D Flash game, utilizing tank controls in environments that require you to constantly change the direction that you're facing. As far as scares are concerned, yeah, everything in this game creeps me out. Visually, it's got this really dated aesthetic with low quality assets, but that doesn't even hold a candle to the game's sound design. The music, the constant sounds of laughter coming from the Laffy Taffy walls, the shuffling around of the Wang Doodles as they approach. This place does not feel very inviting. Something else I want to show you is this glitch where running backwards in certain areas shows you the inside of your character's head. I will not be sleeping well tonight. There's a strange, uncanny charm to LTLL3D PC, and while it dragged on for perhaps a bit longer than I would have hoped, I had a surprising amount of fun revisiting it. The game earns a very, very respectable 8 scare points. And here we are, pretty close to the end. As a final little bonus to wrap things up, I want to talk about a childhood game that never intended on being spooky, but still was to me. The very first video game I ever owned, and in fact, the first game that I ever talked about on this channel, Jimmy Neutron Boy Genius on GameCube. So Jimmy Neutron Boy Genius is a whole lot of meh. It was seemingly rushed out the door to release within close proximity of the film it was based on. A lack of polish, janky controls, and a short runtime are all pretty standard for licensed games at this time. This game unsettled me, not as much as, say, Casper Spirit Dimensions or The Haunted Mansion, but this game is a prime example of the first time I can vividly remember being scared while playing a video game. One where I never expected to feel such a feeling. The very first level takes place in Retroland, an amusement park, and just look at this place. For being hyped up so much for the in-universe characters, there's hardly a living soul here. The first attraction is quite mundane, but the second is where things take a turn. You enter these ruins where a haunting, ambient, droning track can be heard. As you approach this passage, this uncomfortably loud rumbling sound can be heard. I vividly remember not wanting to enter this area because of this sound. I inevitably pressed on, only to go down a slide with these mummies that, while they can't hurt you, they still feel pretty threatening and made younger baby me a bit uneasy. The remaining attractions keep with this uncanny aesthetic. A magic carpet ride with this deep, dark, empty pit, or the giant clown head whose mouth turns into an elaborate maze. This entire level, nay, the entire game, feels like a liminal space in a way, and for that reason, it earns Jimmy Neutron Boy Genius for GameCube and PS2 a solid 6 scare points. And with that, I've covered just about every notable scary game from my childhood. At least the ones that I can remember the most vividly. So what exactly do all of these games have in common? I think I can boil these down to a few core elements. Number 1, liminality and uncanniness. This comes with the territory of playing licensed games on primarily 6th generation console hardware. Graphics around this time were starting to look a lot better and more expressive, but they still had a long way to go. And when it comes to characters being expressive and just the way environments are designed, yeah, this is kind of creepy. Number 2, creepy crawlies. Creatures like ghosts, clowns, skeletons, vampires, etc. Even within the more toned down context of a game intended for children, they're still representations of various fears that many of us have. If the game in question is difficult to the child playing it, and if that difficulty stems from these enemies who, aside from looking the way they do, also happen to present a challenge that the kid needs to overcome, well then that's a recipe for something spooky. It's that possibility of failure, something that doesn't really exist when watching a show or a film, where the outcome is predetermined. You are the one holding that controller. You are the one with agency. Number 3, creepy sound design. This one's pretty self-explanatory, but a lot of the games and moments that creeped me out had music or ambient sounds that I found to be unsettling. Number 4, bad game design. This might sound counterintuitive, but it kind of makes sense to me. If you end up confused or unsure of how to progress in the game that you're playing, then those feelings can strengthen the feeling of confusion, of being intimidated at the prospect of making it to the credits. Okay, 4.5. I personally hate jump scares, but they still give me a jolt of adrenaline. So, So that's it for this spooky meatball. And for the most part, I had a lot of fun revisiting these games. Yeah, that's it. All right, spirits, let's get out of here. Light the way. Huh? What's this? Congratulations on gathering all the spirits. But your mission isn't over yet. You must get past the graveyard of the undead and make it to the outer realm in order to set these spirits free. Follow the path on this map, along with further instructions, and beware of zombies. What? Hi everyone, it's good to see you all. I hope your October has been scary and fun. Thank you all for being patient with me during this unplanned hiatus, and I'm genuinely sorry for disappearing for such a long time. A lot of status quo changes and just insane things happened in my life during the last several months. Stuff that I won't get into, but amidst all of that, some good things also happened. Like the fact that I recently got married. Noodly Boo and I officially tied the knot a little while back, and I'm feeling pretty lucky. It's also a happy coincidence that my comeback happened to be a video that she's also a part of. We recorded her segment last year, and it's kind of crazy to think about how much has changed since then. Anyways, I've gotten a head start on the production of the second part of this 2-part Halloween-themed experience. And while I can't guarantee a release date, I can promise that the wait for the next video won't be nearly as long as the wait for this one was. I'm also going to be collaborating with another YouTuber for this video, who I admire and respect. So I hope you'll all enjoy this video when it releases. Special thanks to all of my patrons, especially those in my Platinum tier who get a verbal shoutout at the end of all of my videos, including Psyche Clips, Starman Omega, Taylor M, and Third Watcher. Have a happy Halloween, everyone. I'll see you all again soon.